Hi, I'm Amy, and welcome to a chronological study of the life of Jesus. Join me as we study the Gospels in order using John MacArthur's book, One Perfect Life. So welcome to lesson 31. In the previous lesson, we had talked about John the Baptist and Jesus and how their ministries were potentially in competition, but that was not the case. And how John kind of said he must increase and I must decrease. And so today's lesson, Jesus meets a Samaritan woman at a well. So that's the name of the lesson today. And we're going to talk about how Jesus travels through Samaria and what that means, and how he encounters this woman and what the interaction, what he says to her and what becomes of it. And so first we're going to read, and this one is a little bit in, a piece of it's from all the Gospels, but a lot of what's coming up is just about John being imprisoned. The actual story of the woman in the well is in John. So that is in John chapter 4. So that's where the majority of the reading is going to come from. So I'm going to read that, and then we will get into, I've got 6 points, but I'm hoping to make most of them pretty short. Just little things I needed to bring out. So let's read first, and then we'll get into the lesson. But Herod the Tetrarch, being rebuked by John concerning Herodias his brother Philip's wife, and for all the evils which Herod had done, also added this, above all, that he shut John up in prison. Therefore, when the Lord knew that the Pharisees had heard that Jesus made and baptized more disciples than John, though Jesus himself did not baptize but his disciples, and when Jesus heard that John had been put in prison, he left Judea and departed again to Galilee. But he needed to go through Samaria. So he came to a city of Samaria, which is called Sychar, near the plot of ground that Jacob gave to his son Joseph. Now Jacob's well was there. Jesus, therefore, being wearied from his journey, sat thus by the well. It was about the 6th hour. A woman of Samaria came to draw water. Jesus said to her, "Give me a drink." For his disciples had gone away into the city to buy food. Then the woman of Samaria said to him, "How is it that you, being a Jew, ask a drink from me, a Samaritan woman?" For Jews have no dealings with Samaritans. Jesus answered and said to her, "If you knew the gift of God, and who it is who says to you, 'Give me a drink,' you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." The woman said to him, "Sir, you have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Where then do you get that living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us the well and drank from it himself, as well as his sons and his livestock?" Jesus answered and said to her, "Whoever drinks of this water will thirst again, but whoever drinks of the water that I shall give him will never thirst. But the water that I shall give him will become in him a fountain of water springing up into everlasting life." The woman said to him, "Sir, give me this water, that I may not thirst, nor come here to draw." Jesus said to her, "Go, call your husband and come here." The woman answered and said, "I have no husband." Jesus said to her, "You have well said, 'I have no husband,' for you have had 5 husbands, and the one whom you now have is not your husband. In that you spoke truly." The woman said to him, "Sir, I perceive that you are a prophet. Our fathers worshipped on this mountain, and you Jews say that in Jerusalem is the place where one ought to worship." Jesus said to her, "Woman, believe me, the hour is coming when you will neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem worship the Father. You worship what you do not know. We know what we worship, for salvation is of the Jews. But the hour is coming, and now is, when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth, for the Father is seeking such to worship him. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth." The woman said to him, "I know that Messiah is coming, who is called Christ. When he comes, he will tell us all things." Jesus said to her, I who speak to you am he. The first point I think it's really important we start here is understanding John's imprisonment. So why was John the Baptist put into prison? What did he do? You know, he's out there baptizing and he's already had a couple run-ins with the Pharisees, but they let him go. They weren't really punishing him or doing anything. So why does he end up in prison? And it talks about Herod the Tetrarch being rebuked by John concerning Herodias, his brother's wife, and the evils that he had done. So John had been, kind of getting on Herod. Herod Antipas is who it is, right? Who's the tetrarch of the area of Galilee and Perea. So the place beyond the Jordan and then up in Galilee. So that's the area where he is in control. And John had been speaking to him that he had been doing some things wrong, And it says it concerning his brother's wife, his brother Philip's wife. So why would he be getting in trouble for his sister-in-law? That doesn't make any sense. But when you understand the true story, his brother's wife, Herodias, was his wife now. So what happened is she was married to his brother and he was married to someone else. And they both divorced their former spouses and married each other. And so John said that ought not be done. Number one, divorce was wrong. The affair was wrong because you're assuming an affair. And marrying your sister-in-law, that's also wrong. That's considered family incestuous. That's not right to be doing that. So a lot of reasons go into that John says you did wrong. And then other evils that Herod had done, John said those are wrong. You shouldn't do that. So he was rebuked. He was told, you are wrong. You shouldn't have done that by John. And Herod didn't like it. And Herodias didn't like it. And so he gets put into prison. They imprison this man because of him speaking that against the ruler of the time. Now, something I looked at, which was very interesting, because the end of John the Baptist comes that he probably has about a 1-year ministry and then 2 years in prison, roughly, throughout most of Jesus' ministry. John's in prison. And he later sends word, which we'll talk about it later. He sends word to Jesus and he basically says, was it worth it? The year I spent preparing the way for you and now I'm in prison. I know I'm going to be killed. That's coming. I know that's coming. Was it worth it? And Jesus sends back word, let him know that the lame leap and the blind are receiving sight and the dead are living and things like that. This idea, which is an Old Testament verse to say, the Lord is here. He is moving. I am he. I am fulfilling the mission and you fulfilled your mission. Yes, it was worth it. You did the right thing. I am who I say I am. I am the Messiah. And so that's and then that's when John's in prison for about 2 years. And then Herodias' daughter from that first marriage with Philip, her name's Salome. Salome. She dances for Herod, her stepfather, essentially, and it pleases him. So he tells her, I'll give you up to the, half the kingdom or whatever he says. We haven't gotten there, but we will. But anyway, the point is he wants to reward her for this dance that has made him happy in front of his court. And she, under the influence of her mother, who is still angry at John the Baptist after probably 2 years, says, I want the head of John the Baptist on a platter. I want you to go ahead and kill him instead of leaving him in prison. And it upsets Herod. But he does it, and that's when John the Baptist dies. And later, actually, after he's killed him, Jesus encounters Herod. And even at that point, he thinks that Jesus is John the Baptist resurrected. He is, and we'll get to it, but in a way I was thinking Herod was haunted by John. And the words that he spoke, maybe that was the first time in Herod's life that somebody had told him, you did wrong. And he didn't like it. And he imprisoned him. And then it haunted him. And then because he thought highly of John, he respected John nonetheless. Otherwise, you just dismiss him and move on as a lunatic, or none of what you say matters, I don't care. But he took it to heart enough that he punished John for what he said to him. So John's words hurt Herod, and in the place where he didn't want to be hurt. Maybe he'd never been hurt like that and called out for his wrongdoing. And when Herodias calls for his death, it upsets Herod. He doesn't want to do that. And there could be a lot of other reasons, but I think he was beginning to see, or at least felt in his spirit, that that was wrong to kill that man. Then, when he encounters Jesus, he thinks it's John back from the dead. So in a way, the two men are tied together, that Herod has this kind of link with John, that John was haunting him. His message haunted Herod. And that's just something I haven't really developed that full idea, but it was just something I thought about as I think about how these stories went and how these people interacted, that John influenced Herod so much that he thought about him years later, you know. Anyway, let's see. One thing I did look at, which was interesting, because I was kind of curious at this Salome Herodias issue. So I looked up Herodias, and she was of royalty, and she was engaged to be married before the age of 11-ish. She was born in like 20 or, let's see, she was born in 15 BC. So 15 BC. And one person that was upset about her engagement died like maybe 4 BC or something. So she would have been about 11 by then. And so she was already engaged before that. So she was engaged to be married to this guy named Philip, who was, I believe he might have been a relative somehow to kind of get, you know, royalty to stay in power. But anyway, she was engaged. I don't know when she got married, but she was betrothed before she was even 11. So no choice of hers. She just had to do it, right? And they probably had other children. That's something you can maybe think about. But she has this daughter named Salome in AD 14. So she's roughly 29 years old when she has Salome, which is latter part of your life. If you're thinking you're getting married, like in Jewish customs, probably in her teens, and you're having a regular marital relationship, it seems late to be having a first child or something. So I'm guessing she had other children, but she was about 29 when she has this daughter, which is in AD 14. Now, that daughter's born in AD 14. This occurrence is happening roughly, I think, about 27 AD. So you're looking at Salome dancing before the king when she is roughly 15 years old. So, and Herodias would have been about 44. Her mother would have been about 44 years old. So we think of these people sometimes as if they're older and all of this, but no, they're kind of, you know, middle-aged, and Salome's only 15 up there dancing in front of men and adults and her stepfather. And when you think about a child dancing before adults and that it pleases them enough that they want to reward them greatly, I just don't see the innocence in it. I don't see that it was harmless, because having children, being around children that come before you to show you their tricks and their dances and the things that they do, you see it and you say, oh, wow, good job, you know, and it's not, the innocent is sometimes silly to us as adults. We're just like, oh, great job, and you move on. So I kind of wonder if there were overtones that were sexual in nature to this dance and to this presentation of this daughter before the royal court, and kind of how that went. Again, that's a future conversation, but to really put flesh on this story of what's going on and the character of these people that you're dealing with. So just something to think about. Again, we'll talk about it in the future, but John's imprisonment was due to the fact that he spoke truth to Herod. Even though Herod was in power and John was not, he spoke truth and said, a sin is a sin. And the application point for us is that we should always speak the truth. Calling a sin is what we are called to do, not in a judgmental fashion, but to preserve truth. You have to call out sin. You have to say, that is wrong. That is not right. And in our culture, there will be a lot of opposition, because our culture It is very unpopular to speak truth. It is very unpopular to have an absolute truth and authority in the Bible and tell other people that they are wrong for not believing that. That is unpopular. Now, it's unpopular for people to be told that they have to conform to the Bible, that a sin is a sin, that God is a righteous judge. People don't want to hear that because they want autonomy. They want to be able to sin. They enjoy their sin. They enjoy their lifestyle. They enjoy evil and darkness, and it can't abide in the light, right? So in a society that values self and it values autonomy and self-expression and is just very prideful in the way that we live, as if we are the most important things ever created, that message of truth, that sin is not going to be popular. Yet we're still called to do it. And I think in our society, in the recent events that have happened where evil seems to prevail in the face of truth, that you can be silenced for speaking truth, that people will hate that you speak truth, and that evil can befall you for speaking truth. Just understand that Jesus said they did it to him first. Understand that he says that we need to be sanctified in the truth, and that his word is the truth, and we are to go out and to tell people that. But they hated him first, and they're going to hate us for that, because darkness hates light. And so John's imprisoned for speaking the truth, and yet we're still called to speak the truth. The second thing is Jesus departed. His departure from Judea. So why did Jesus leave Judea? Well, he's down there, and John's been arrested. He's associated with John through baptism. He could feel like there's a threat there with the Pharisees or with Herod or the people in any way, and he may need to get out of that hostile territory. That could be one aspect of it, that the Pharisees would then associate him with John. John's got a little bit of demise now, and he might suffer a similar fate, so let's leave. It wasn't Jesus' time yet to go to the cross, and so he did not want to be part of that landscape anymore. So he went to the north, to Galilee, where it was his home. He was more familiar, maybe a little less hostile, maybe a more friendly ground, right? However, Samaria, in the location, you've got Judea in the bottom, Samaria sandwiched in between Judea and Galilee. Okay, and then the Jordan River and the Mediterranean kind of encapsulate those, right? So, or sandwich those in. So to get from Judea to Galilee, you got to go straight through Samaria. But people hated the Samaritans. The Jews hated the Samaritans. They thought they were second-class citizens and all of this. So they would go around, across the Jordan, go up through Perea, which would actually be this way for you guys. Go up through Perea and come back into Galilee after crossing the Jordan and coming up, so that they would avoid Samaria altogether. Why? Why is that? Why would you hate a people group so much that you would? Because it wasn't that they were evil. It wasn't that they would hurt you. The issue was with unclean and the thought about it. So Samaria was a land of what was northern Israel at the time. You know, when the kingdom split, you had all of Israel, and the kingdom split after Solomon. And you had Israel in the north and Judah in the south. Israel went into captivity sooner than Judea did. They went off to Syria and they went off to Babylon. That's kind of how it worked out. And the Assyrians and the Babylonians as well took the people into exile, the Israelites into exile. And they would leave some, but then they would also put other exiles from other nations into that land, because now that kingdom owns that land. Why leave it barren? So they would put in inhabitants that were from other places. And they thought by intermingling all the people, you would be able to control them, because now you don't have pockets of people that know each other. You've got mixed groups of people that aren't necessarily united. So they would put those people there to work the land. So what resulted after exile is you've got Jews coming back, Jews that were already there that have intermarried with these other exiles that were placed there. You got Jews coming back in that intermarry, and Samaria became a very impure bloodline. And so it was considered half-breed people. So you had some Jews that had intermarried, and it just kind of diluted their Jewish culture in that area. And through the intermarrying, they would worship on Mount Gerizim, which was in the Old Testament. There was mention of Mount Gerizim where there were blessings and curses that Moses did and all this sort of stuff. But they thought that was the place that we should worship because that's kind of the first place of the covenants and things like that. And they couldn't go down to Jerusalem, or they thought they shouldn't because the Jews despised them. They looked down on them. And so they ended up setting up their temple and everything on Mount Gerizim instead of going down to the temple in Jerusalem. So you've got a whole different area to worship. Then you've got mixed breeded people and different, what's called syncretism, or syncretism. Syncretism is the word. And so what it is you take a little bit of this religion, a little bit of this religion, and say, oh, that's like this, and they kind of merge. So it's not so much cherry picking the different parts as it can be, but it's also like, oh, that deity is kind of like this deity, and then that kind of merges into an idea. And we see that happen sometimes in colonial era when you're traveling and you're bringing Christianity to a different population, and that population already had a religion, so it kind of gets muddled. And so that's what happens. They end up with this different theology. They don't hold to anything beyond the Pentateuch, the first 5, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. They don't hold to anything else because the rest of that would uphold Jerusalem as the center of the religion. So they kind of get rid of all that. They only hold to the Pentateuch, and so in traditional Jews, didn't care for Samaritans. They thought they were second-class citizens. They were dogs. And so they would travel away from them. So I say all that for what purpose? Because Jesus didn't travel around Samaria. Jesus said he needed to go through. Okay? So why? Why did Jesus need to go through? Because he doesn't show partiality. His gospel is for all people. His salvation is open to all people, not just Jews, but Gentiles too, even Samaritans who were thought of in his culture. And he should have thought of them as dogs. He should have thought of them as half-breeds, but he doesn't, because he sees the humanity of them. So he chose to go through Samaria for her. He needed to go through Samaria to meet with her. He had a divine appointment with this woman. And so he chose this route, this unpopular route, to be with that woman, to meet that woman and have this conversation. Now, this woman is at Jacob's well. So that's my next point, is Jacob's well. Now, this was traditionally a very deep well. It's even still today known as one of the deepest wells in Palestine. It was in the city of Sychar. It was given to Jacob's beloved son, Joseph. So Jacob, you got Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Jacob has 12 sons. They become the 12 tribes of Israel. That's kind of how that works out. But his beloved son was Joseph. He gives him the coat of many colors. He gets sold into Egypt because his brother's jealousy and all that. So this is the portion of land that he gave to Joseph. And you can read about that in Genesis 48 and Genesis 33, where Joseph takes this land, or it's a portion to him. So those are two heroes, two fathers, of the Jewish faith. So she's saying this was our father Jacob and Joseph's. So it's very important, very prestigious that they have that well in their land. This well could have been anywhere from 65 to 100 feet deep. So it's pretty deep. You would have to definitely have something to draw with, a long rope, and sometimes the stones around it would have grooves in it where they're letting the ropes down. So drawing the water was a womanly task. It was a chore that the women would do, and they would usually do it in a gathering. They would do it in the morning or late in the afternoon, in the evening, to avoid the high sun. But it was a communal chore that they did, where they would, water cooler talk. They would gather together and fellowship and do chores together and have community that way. So this is something interesting, is that this woman's in the 6th hour when Jesus sits down. That's where she is. Now, if you're talking about Roman time, it's a 12-hour calendar. 6 could be 6 p.m. But if you're going by the Jewish calendar, the 6th hour is about noon. And so either way you look at it, noon would have probably been a more popular understanding of the time because it's midday. It's the hot time of the day. Jesus is tired. He's thirsty. He needs a drink. He stops by the well. And no one is there. And that's when this woman's choosing to go. So it wasn't a common chore, and yet she's coming out alone. And the idea there is that why? Why is this woman choosing to be separate? And it's because she's probably ostracized. She's clearly had a lot of husbands, according to Jesus, and she says, that's true. And so she doesn't fit into that society. She's an outcast, and she would rather be alone in the heat of the day than be around people that don't welcome her, that don't want her, that talk ugly about her. Yet Jesus meets her where she is, right? So this is another story where Jesus knows the heart. Like we talked about, Jesus knows the heart of man, and there was a man named Nicodemus, and he tells what's in his heart. This one, he tells her what, things about herself as well. So how does this woman compare, contrast to Nicodemus? Nicodemus was well respected. He sought Jesus out. He was, curious. He was religious. He was a good teacher. He was very serious. He was a Jew. He was a morally upright Jew. And he was a church man, And then you look at her, and she is Samaritan, so she's second class. She is not that religious because she's not following God. She's not obedient to God. She's living in sin. So she's immoral. She's of the world, and she's a woman. So she's not prestigious in that way. So in essence, basically, this Samaritan woman is nothing like, from the outward appearance, what Nicodemus was like. And yet Jesus took time to have conversations with both of these people. And what I think the standout takeaway point here is that Jesus meets you where you are. That this woman was in an odd place at an odd time, and she's totally different from Nicodemus, and yet he gave of himself to both. He gave time, he gave explanations, he gave a gentle response, and he did not judge them harshly beyond what would open their eyes to their sin and to their misunderstandings, but he did what it would take to gain their attention and to point out what was right and what was wrong so that they could make the change themselves and to follow him. And so Jesus doesn't look at the fact that she's a sinner as to why he can't be around her. He meets you where you are. Jesus comes to get us. It said he needed to go through Samaria to meet with her, He chooses us, not because of what we are, what we will be, or anything like that, but he chooses us for his own purposes, and he comes for us. He comes for us right in the middle of our day. He came for this woman potentially at noon, right in the middle of her day, right in the middle of her chores, in the middle of the mundane, in the middle of the sin, in the midst of all of life that we live, that we don't even think about, our work, our raising the kids, our cooking dinner, our driving in our car, us listening to music, us running into somebody in the grocery store. In the middle of all of that, us just existing, Jesus comes for us. And that's what he does for this woman. And Jesus is there. Jesus comes for us if we will look up and see him. And he's there with us. He is with us at all times. If you're a Christian, Jesus is with you at all times. The Spirit is everywhere present. He is, when you open the door, he is with you on this side of the door. He is with you on the other side, waiting on you. Jesus, there's never a time or a place where the love of God can't reach you, is what it says. And I think it's Romans chapter, was it 8 or 9? I can't remember. I think it's 8. But the idea is, or maybe it's not, I can't remember. But the idea is that the arm of God is not too short to reach you. And Jesus meets this woman, and just like he meets us right in the middle of our everyday lives to change our lives. And we just need to look up and realize Jesus is there. And there's never a place that we will go where Jesus won't be. There's never a time where we live our life where Jesus isn't with us. If you're a believer, God is with you always. Jesus is always with us. The Holy Spirit is always with you, always guiding, always working, always providing a way. So it doesn't matter your background. It doesn't matter your future. When you are chosen and called by God, He will meet you right there where you are. The fourth point I've got is about this living water. So what is this living water? Because He says, if you knew who I was, then you would ask me for living water. So she first says, hey, why are you having dealings with me? Because number one, you're a Jew and I'm a Samaritan. That's not supposed to happen, especially a woman. You're not supposed to be talking to a Samaritan woman who is potentially unclean at all times. It's kind of how they thought of a Samaritan woman. They're just always unclean. And you're not supposed to be talking. And then to drink from her jar would have made him ceremonial unclean according to Jewish law. The disciples are out in the city buying food, so that was an okay interaction according to Jewish law, but to use their utensils or to eat or drink from their cups and plates would have made them unclean because the Samaritans were unclean. So she's got a lot in her mind about why are you asking me this? This is odd even for this interaction to happen, because according to the laws and customs, you shouldn't even be talking to me, let alone asking for some water from me. But he takes it and uses it as an object lesson about the water. That the water you're drawing from me, or that you would draw from me, which it never shows that she actually ever drew any water for him. So I don't guess he ever got any water, because she runs off to the city after this. But so Jesus has just left thirsty. But in that, the well is her frame of reference. So Jesus says, I would give you living water. And so this living water will make you never thirst again. And it wells up with this eternal life and brings life inside a man. And she just takes it so literally. She doesn't understand. She thinks that's a good idea, that I won't have to come and draw and I won't be thirsty. But what is this living water? This living water was thought to be a flowing water, a body of water like a stream or like a river, not a stagnant pond, or a lake or something like that, but something that had flowing water, not the Dead Sea, essentially, right? It's a flowing body. It's flowing and not stagnant. It replenishes, it cleanses. That was the idea of living water, was a moving water. But he's talking about the Holy Spirit. He is talking about the Spirit coming to live, God Himself living with you and giving you life and giving you replenishment and refreshing, and that you won't thirst again. And so he's telling her that the Holy Spirit satisfies in a way that nothing else will. She has dipped into this bucket. And if you're using the metaphor of life, she has used different buckets. She's had 5 husbands. She's had ways that she's tried to quench that thirst within her, this desire to feel something that she knows she doesn't feel. She doesn't know what it is, but she knows she doesn't feel it. And she's tried different buckets and she's tried different wells, and nothing is quenching that thirst. And he says, the Holy Spirit, I will give you living water. This Holy Spirit will satisfy you. You will never thirst for those other buckets or those other wells ever again. Because all those wells will run dry. Those buckets will be empty, but not this living water. It springs up and it will always be there. And so what is our biggest thirst in this world? What was she thirsting for, And I think that sometimes we can thirst for peace. We just want peace. We're always surrounded by strife or struggle, and sometimes we just want peace. Sometimes we are looking for love, and I think that's probably what she was looking for: love and acceptance and protection and security, and she found it in 5 husbands, She was looking for a place to rest, to have fulfillment and belonging and love. And in 5 husbands, she's running through them, and she can't feel that thirst yet. And the last guy she's with, there's no point in even marrying him because he's not it either. This is not the lifestyle that's bringing this love and this belonging. Sometimes we are thirsty for happiness. Sometimes we're thirsty for security. Sometimes we're thirsty for fulfillment, and we will pour ourselves into unworthy tasks and find our identity and our fulfillment in those things instead of things that last. Jesus said, put your treasure in heaven where nothing destroys it, you know? And so we struggle and we strive for treasures on earth that when we die, those things die. And sometimes we look for prestige. Sometimes we are thirsty for something that fills something in us, that quenches some kind of desire in us that only God can do. And we look for it in a lot of different places. There are so many places in this world that we look to satisfy that thirst. We'll look to people like spouses or children. We'll look to our job. We'll look to drugs. We'll look to alcohol. We'll look to a social group or an identity with a cause or politics or just hedonism, just self-indulgence, whatever it is, materialistic. And we look for that to quench whatever thirst it is that we have. But he's telling her that you can desperately try to quench that thirst with this well that you're dipping from. But this happiness, peace, and all that in the world is just not going to last. That Jesus is the only hope that we have for true joy, peace, and fulfillment that lasts. And that's what he's telling her in this moment, that this living water is something that will last. And she just doesn't seem to grasp the concept of it in that moment, right? So then he pivots to this Jesus knows all. That's my next point. Jesus knows all. He cuts straight to the heart of her problems, right? So he tells her that her problem is men. Her problem is husbands and ostracizing from these women and everything. This hole that she's got. Go get your husband. I don't have a husband. And he said, yeah, I know you've had 5. And now the one you're with is not your husband. And the light bulb clicks for her a little bit. She's like, oh, you're a prophet. I can tell you know things that you shouldn't know. And so in that moment, she doesn't latch on to Jesus as a source of that fulfillment. She, I would say, tries to distract him. So she asked him a question about worship on Mount Gerizim or Jerusalem. Which one's right? Which one's wrong? Because your people say this, my people say this. What's right? And so she sees that he's a prophet by his knowledge of her. But let's move that aside, because I don't want to talk about that. While I've got you here and you seem to know things, what's your opinion on this? And instead of being distracted by that, he tells her, hey, you're talking about worship, but I'll tell you what, salvation's of the Jews, and we know who we worship, God, but there's a time coming where we will worship in spirit and truth, that God's looking for true worshipers that worship through the heart, that worship in spirit and truth, that are hungry and thirsty for the things of God and will live their life devoted to those things. And that is salvation. And he's alluding to the time when salvation's opened up not just to the Jews, but to the world, to the Gentiles as well. So Jesus got right to the heart of her problem, which was sin. You know, sin is what separated her. Sin is what created that hole, and she couldn't fill it. So she filled it with more sin, and it just wasn't right. Our problem is sin as well. Nothing's hidden. You can try to distract God all you want, but you're not going to distract God from your sin, and you're not going to distract yourself from that thirst that you have for very long. It always comes back, you know. Jesus knows our sin. He sees our sin, and he died for our sin. Why did he do that? Because he is the bridge. Through his death, burial, resurrection, he bridged that gap between us, sinful people, and God, who is holy. And so Jesus created this way that though we had sin that was separating, Jesus bridged that gap, that we can now be true worshipers of God, that we can worship alive in spirit and in truth, and through a pure heart, and through the forgiveness of Jesus. And that's what he's offering her in this moment. I offer you forgiveness and eternal life, and I offer you a new way. I offer you fulfillment for what you've been trying to fulfill. And I think that message will preach harder than I can even go into depth, but there are so many things in our lives that we try to plug into that hole that we just know isn't right. It doesn't sit well with us, and we hate it, and we try to quench it, and we try to stop it, and we try to do everything in our power to silence that alarm that just something's not right. And Jesus telling her, it's me this living water. It's me that fills that. It's walking with me. It's believing in me. It's having my Spirit live in you that silences that alarm of, I'm not right. I'm not okay. I'm not okay. Jesus makes it okay for us. And Jesus soothes us and redeems us from that brokenness that we feel. So her problem was sin. That's our problem. Her root cause was that she was looking for something, some kind of love or some kind of belonging. And my question is, what is the root of your problem? Besides it just being sin, like what specific sin is it in you? What is it that's the root cause? If you had to say the thing that maybe you're trying to hide from God, maybe you are indulging in, and you're a little bit bound by it. It's something that's got a little bit of bondage. It's got a hold on you. And you're trying to hide it from God. You're trying to quench it. You're trying to snuff it out, but it's not working, Is there something in your life that's causing you problems that you just need to give over to Jesus and let His Spirit heal that part of you? That's a personal question, and it's something maybe you want to think about. What is it that I'm keeping that's keeping me from God? What am I keeping that is keeping me from God? And Jesus already knows it. And He is waiting there for you to accept that, to accept Him, to accept His forgiveness, and to help Him, to allow Him to help you clean up your heart. And so He knows all things, right? And the last part, point number 6, is that Jesus is Messiah. And it's very interesting. This woman's a woman, first of all, which is a second-class citizen in their society. They were not thought of as the same level as men. Number 2, she's a Samaritan, second-class citizen. She's not Jewish. Yet Jesus takes the time to tell her He's the Messiah. The one you are looking for or seeking or whatever. He says, I who speak to you am He. It's I am. I am. That's what He's telling her, which is a reference to the Old Testament when Moses said, who will I tell that sent me? And God said, I am. I am. And later in John, Jesus will keep saying, I am the bread of life. I am the good shepherd. I am. So He's telling her, what you're talking about, this Messiah that's got, I am. I am that Messiah. I am He. And so that's the first time that Jesus makes that declaration that's recorded, that I am He. And He tells this woman. He doesn't tell the religious leaders. He doesn't even tell His disciples. He tells this woman. And the question then is, why does He tell her? Why does He go after her for that, Why did Jesus tell her? And I think, He didn't fear any political repercussions of the day by telling her. She was too lowly to do much for Him, She's not going to cause a big problem for Him if He revealed His identity. He didn't fear that. Instead, He tells her. I think also more than that is He wanted to tell her. She needed that. And He later in the next session, in the next lesson, we'll talk about how He was able to minister and she evangelized her whole town. He opens her eyes to His true nature. Jesus is for all people, even a Samaritan, even a woman. Although she was second class, she was unclean, Jesus saw her for what she was, a sinner that needs salvation. And He revealed Himself to her. And I think the application point is that may we see with the eyes of God. May we humanize those around us, the people that we would consider enemies or lowly, or the ones that we would consider beneath us. Sad to say, but everybody's prideful. Everybody is judgmental, even though we're called not to be. Help us to see with the eyes of God, to see the human for the human, the sinner for the sinner, and not to judge, but to bring salvation to them, to let them know that Jesus saves sinners. You look like a sinner. You are a sinner. Jesus came for that, And so He sees her with the eyes of God, that she is a sinner and needs salvation. And He says, I am everything that you've been looking for. I am. And she latches on to that, and she goes and tells everybody about it. So the main point of this lesson is that Jesus met this woman right where she was and recognized her as a sinner needing salvation and told her He was the Messiah to bring that salvation. I am everything that you have been looking for. I am everything that you have been thirsting and searching for. I am that. And that's what He tells her. And so that's the end of the lesson. That's the main point, is that Jesus knows all things, and He is the fulfillment of everything that we could ever want. and we will find that satisfaction in him. And so I hope that you can have something out of this lesson that you can take away and share with somebody. Share that living water that changes lives. Share that Jesus fulfills all the cries of our heart with somebody else. And thank you for watching this video. And in the next video, we're going to talk about the town that the lady's from and all the people in it and how Jesus ministered and witnessed and kind of helped that town and all of what went on there. So join me in that video. Thank you for watching this one.